Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
And I'm Amanda Olberg. Paul, what do people say is the likely impact of voucher programs on the achievement level of students in the public schools?
Well, there's two theories out there, Amanda. One says that the competition will be good for the public schools. They'll get better if there's a voucher program. That's Milton Friedman's theory of competition. The other point of view says that no, public schools will be discouraged by the competition. For one thing, the best pupils will leave and schools will face many more problems as a result.
Is there any evidence that the best students leave the public schools when a voucher program is introduced?
Well, existing voucher programs are designed to serve disadvantaged students. So while this could happen in theory, we haven't seen much evidence of it in practice. If you look at the actual characteristics, as best we can see them from objective data, we find that the people who take vouchers tend to be low-income, disadvantaged students, mainly because the program is designed that way. So there's no sign yet that the best and brightest are leaving the public schools.
But don't vouchers create a financial problem for the public schools?
Well, no school likes to lose students, so everybody doesn't like to see enrollment falling at their school, but theoretically there should be no long-term impact if school funding follows the child, which is always the way state formulas are written. Whatever school district is educating the child gets the money from the government, and there's always movement from schools from one school to another or one school district to another. So whether or not schools actually lose money depends a lot on the way a specific voucher law is written. In Wisconsin, the largest, most sustained voucher program, public schools have actually had more money per pupil in the years following the introduction of the voucher program. So the financial problems that the public schools face are probably overstated by the critics of vouchers.
So has anyone studied the effects of vouchers on students' performance in the public schools?
Well, there haven't been many large-scale voucher programs in the United States, so it's pretty hard to come to any strong conclusions about the effects on public school performance. But there are two pretty good studies, one of a voucher program, the other of a tax credit program, and both programs operated in the state of Florida. So from these studies, we can get at least some early glimpse at the likely effects on public school performance of the competition that vouchers stimulate.
So who performed the study that looked at voucher effects, and how did they design their study?
Well, the study was conducted by Cecilia Rouse and her colleagues. They took advantage of the fact that students who were going to public schools that failed were in danger of losing students to private schools if they failed again the next year, because the law was written in such a way that any school where the school was given a failing grade 2 years in a row, students could get a voucher to go to a private school. So the study looked at those schools given a failing grade to see if they would improve the next year relative to other schools that just failed to get the failing grade or just barely passed and received a D instead of an F.
And what did Rouse and her colleagues find?
Well, they found that once a school got an F, they changed their instructional practices in important ways, and test scores went up. So they really found positive effects of competition. That study was repeated by several others, and so we have pretty strong evidence that the threat of a voucher stimulated improvement in the public schools.
And then what was the tax credit study? How was that one designed?
That study was done by David Figlio at Northwestern University. He looked at tax credits in Florida just when the program began. So he could compare life in Florida just before and just after tax credits. What he did is he looked at the public schools that were the closest to private schools and therefore the public schools that were most likely to be impacted by this tax credit program, which was now going to draw low-income students away from the public schools to these private schools. And the question was, would these private schools improve or would they get worse as a result of this competition?
What did Figlio find?
Figlio found that those public schools that were heavily impacted by the tax credit program because they were close to private schools improved more than did the public schools that were further away from any private school. So both these studies show that public schools improve when they face competition and offer no support for the discouragement hypothesis that they go downhill in the face of competition.
So those are both short-term responses. What would happen in the long run after parents have had a choice for a number of years and school systems have been able to evolve in response to that? Can you study that?
Well, we would love to know the answer to that question, but we can't study that in the United States because none of these programs have been around long enough. However, you can study this if you broaden your vision and look at countries around the world. And that's exactly what Ludger Wussmann and Martin West did.
How did they perform their study?
Well, they used the PISA data to compare countries that have a lot of school choice with those countries that don't have much school choice to see if there's a noticeable difference in how much students learn in the countries that provide more school choice.
The PISA data are discussed in part 1 of the methods lecture. So if you'd like to learn more about PISA, please consult that lecture. Paul, the PISA data provide comparable data on multiple developed countries. But do other countries actually have school choice programs in place?
You know, it was a surprise to me when I read this study to learn that school choice is widespread in many countries around the world. It's so controversial in the United States, but in many countries there's a lot of opportunity to go to private schools with government support. In the Netherlands, 77% of the students are attending private schools. In Belgium, 69%, Ireland, 61%, Korea, 56%, Australia, 38%, Japan, 27%, Denmark, 22%. All of that stands in sharp contrast to the United States, where only about 8% of all elementary and secondary school students attend private schools.
So one of the reasons that only 8% of students attend private schools in the United States is because the government doesn't fund very many opportunities for private school attendance. Is that the same around the world?
Well, actually, in many countries, there is an opportunity to get government support even though you go to a private school, even a religious school. In the United States, only 2% of the funding of private schools comes from the government. There is a little federal aid for that purpose. But in other countries, 99% of the income of private schools comes from the government. And in the Netherlands, it's 96%. In Germany, 78%. So people don't talk about charter schools or vouchers in Europe and in Asia. But private schools in these countries are given money from the government for every student that decides to go there. Yet it is also the case that that government money comes with government regulations. So these private schools are not completely independent. They're more like charter schools, which, as we shall see in the next lecture, also are subject to government regulation.
Well, that's good background on students around the world and their attendance at private schools. But going back to Wussmann and West, what did they find in their study? Do students, in fact, learn more if they go to private schools?
The research team found very little difference between student performance at public and private schools once family background factors were taken into account. So there is no strong evidence that private schools are actually better than public schools if you look at them all around the world.
What about the school system as a whole? Do school systems that have more school choice available perform better on the whole?
And that's the irony of this study. Even though private schools are no better than public schools, public and private schools together both improve when they compete against one another. So what the study shows is that if you have school choice, everybody gets better.
So how much do they get better? What are the long-term effects of a competitive system?
The study shows that a 10% increase in competition, that is, in overall private school enrollment, is associated with about 40% of a year's worth of learning for individual students. So that's pretty big, that you can lift student performance by just about a half a year if you increase the amount of choice in the system by 10 percentage points. But for this change to occur in the United States, it would have to be a well-developed and well-designed program. We can't say that it would just automatically happen if you had that 10% increase.
Is there any chance that we could get that 10% increase in overall parental choice in the United States?
I used to think the answer to that was no, but I'm now beginning to think that as charter schools grow in numbers, this becomes a possibility. Today they are about 5% of all public school enrollment. But if they expand at a faster rate than they have in the past, then you could imagine that competitive system developing. We'll discuss that topic in our next lecture. But for now, I would like you to listen to John Kirtley, who is a strong advocate of school vouchers and tax credits in Florida. And his vision as to the future is another way of thinking about what might happen in the United States. I have with me today John Kirtley, who is the Florida head of the Step Up for Student Tax Credit Scholarship Program, and he's also a member of a pro-choice organization nationwide, the American Federation for Children. So John has been following school vouchers, tax credits, charter schools, all of these topics for many, many years. And John, I want to ask you a question. Charter schools have about 5% of the student population today. Vouchers have a few 100,000 students. That's all a good start, but it's a long ways to go. What's your organization, the groups you work with, what your views as to what you need to do in the future to expand the opportunities out there in the choice world?
That's a great question, Paul. The way I see things is the definition of public education is changing very rapidly. The old definition, say 30, 40 years ago, was we raise taxpayer dollars, we give all those dollars over to the districts. The school districts run all the schools in a fairly uniform manner, and then they assign children by their zip codes. That was public education. What we're moving towards is a very different definition, which is we raise taxpayer dollars and then we allow parents to direct those dollars to different providers and even different delivery methods, the ones they think fit their children the best. And what we're seeing more frequently is parents combining delivery methods and providers at the same time. Now that is, I believe, the trend of the future, customization. K-12 education customized to meet the needs of each child, to serve them best, whoever they may be. And every child is so different. So the key is, for the future, how do you convince policymakers that this is the direction that we need to go in? Well, I think it's fairly easy to convince parents that they should have the power to choose and the power to customize. What we have found since our organizations, we really work to empower low-income parents, because I don't really worry so much about parents with means. You know, traditionally they have either moved to a neighborhood with a good public school or one that fits their kids' needs, or they pay for an alternative. Parents with means are always going to be at the forefront of this customization, I believe. I'm very concerned about low-income parents who may not have the economic means to do this customization.
So it's a new kind of choice that you're saying is coming onto the a political agenda. We're no longer thinking about it's either this or that,
Yes.
but it's a much more customized.
Yeah, we're trying to get opinion leaders and legislators, policymakers to quit thinking about this form of choice, whether it's a voucher or a tax credit or a charter or a magnet even, and think more about the concept of customization. And the lines between public and private are blurring very rapidly. I mean, if you think about it, in my hometown of Tampa, Hillsborough County, you have anything from a typical zoned public school, but then you also have private organizations under contract with the district, and it might be a for-profit or nonprofit organization running a charter school. You might have a private faith-based school that's educating kids with taxpayer dollars, either directly through the McKay Scholarship Program for kids with disabilities or indirectly through the tax credit program. Where does public end and private begin?
So it's all mixed, but many people say that all this is going to hurt the public schools. The public schools are going to lose money, they're going to lose the best students. You know, we will destroy our public school system with all this customized choice. How do you respond to that concern?
I respond through what I've learned through actual experience, Paul. And that is that with the tax credit program in Florida, we have one of the largest experiments in choice that's ever occurred in the country. We now have 60,000 children on this program statewide. It's been around for about 10 years. You have to be low income to be on the program. You have to meet the requirements of their free or reduced lunch program. And interestingly, our families are significantly poorer than even that standard. Our average household income for our families is $25,000 for a household of 4. Now, people said to me in the early days of this program, oh, you're going to cream the best poor kids from the public schools, and therefore making it harder for the teachers in the public schools to work with the kids, because they'll be left with the hardest case kids. Well, we by law, all of our kids have to be tested. Every year their test scores are sent to Northwestern University and studied. And what we learned was that we are taking the lowest performing kids out of the public schools. So the exact opposite of the creaming argument has occurred.
So the ones who aren't doing well are the ones who leave.
Yes, and if you think about it, that makes common sense, because if you're a low-income parent and your child is doing great in their assigned public school, you're not going to make a change if they're doing great, if they're thriving. But if they're struggling and you're very concerned about their future, you are going to make the effort to make a change. And I will add also that because our scholarship by law is limited to right now about 80% of what the state contribution to the public schools, not even all public school spending, there's a gap between the average tuition at a private school and our scholarship. So the parent has to come out of pocket on average about $1,000 per kid. That's a huge economic sacrifice when you're making $25,000 per year. So again, it makes common sense, intuitive sense, that the kids who are struggling are the ones who come on our program.
You have to be really unhappy with the school
Yes.
you have to take advantage of this program.
They're not unhappy with the school, and this is where we try to get away from inflammatory rhetoric about failing schools. You have schools that will serve some kids very, very well, and then some kids not well. We don't assign blame or fault. What we try to do is empower the parent to move to a place where their child will do better.
So this is your idea of customization
Yes.
again.
And let me finish a point about the harm to the public schools. What Northwestern has also found, which is fascinating, is that the more a public school has children come on the Step Up program, the bigger the learning gains for the kids who remain at that public school. Now let me say it again. The more a public school has kids come on our program, the better the kids do who remain at the public school.
So why is that? Why would they do better?
We cannot say. There's no statistical proof as to why yet. But if I had to guess, I would say, intuitively, if you're taking the worst performing kids out of a classroom, a public school classroom, it's probably easier for the teacher at that public school to work with the kids that remain and improve their learning gains. That's my guess.
Well, John, this has been a great opportunity to visit with you, and I wish you well on all of your endeavors.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you.